Good morning. A very warm welcome to the 15th meeting of the Education and Skills Committee. Our first item of business today is to decide to take items 3 and 4 in private to allow discussion of their evidence today and the committee's work programme. Members content to take items 3 and 4 in private? Thank you to committee members. We now move to agenda item 2, which is a schools education and learning inquiry on the evidence session on the impact of coronavirus outbreak on school education and early learning. And we're delighted to welcome to committee this morning Councillor Stephen McCabe, Children and Young People spokesperson from COSLA. Good morning. Eddie Follen, Chief Officer of Children and Young People at COSLA, and Carrie Lindsay, President of the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland. And could I invite Councillor McCabe to make an opening statement?
Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today, Convener. The past 3 months have been exceptional for all of us, and we are acutely aware of the impact that this crisis has had on our society, and in particular on our education system, children, young people, their families and our staff. It has been enormous. Local authorities have responded quickly to the emergency phase of the crisis, including establishing hub provision for the children of key workers and vulnerable children. We have supported somewhere in the region of 170,000 young people with free school meals, and we have continued to support children in need of care and protection in extremely challenging circumstances. As we've moved into the recovery phase, the focus has of course changed to working with the Scottish Government and other partners to make sure we continue to offer support to children and young people in Term 4 and look ahead to safely returning to face-to-face learning in August. As you know, we are taking a blended approach with a mix of learning in school and at home. At a local level, councils are in the process of developing their plans, and nationally strategic discussion continues through the COVID-19 Education Recovery Group with the Scottish Government on resources through the Education Recovery Resources Group. The committee has asked that I address a number of specific points. On COSLA's role, I should point out that we do not monitor members' activity or tell them what to do. It's for councils to take decisions on how national guidance is applied locally, considering local circumstances and local need. As set out in the strategic framework, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all model to reopening schools. While there will be similarities to a blended learning approach in all councils, there will be differences between them, and that is to be expected based on resources and the shape of local communities in terms of factors like geography, deprivation, school estate and staffing levels. Elected members will be accountable to their local communities for the decisions that their councils make. COSLA has had a role in negotiating nationally on behalf of councils and seeking their collective agreement to the strategic framework and to the many bits of guidance produced through the Education Recovery Group process. With our partners in local government and the Scottish Government, we have a role in ensuring that guidance can be applied locally to take account of local needs. The committee may be aware that Education Scotland now has a role in analysing local plans and reporting on these. We will of course work closely with them to understand the challenges local areas face in delivering these plans. The committee also asked us to specifically address the issue of parental engagement. There is little doubt that the speed with which councils have had to react to the crisis has had an impact on how they have been able to engage with parents. In the emergency phase, this was a significant challenge. It is not surprising, therefore, that parents may feel anxious and indeed disconnected from the school. It is our understanding from Education Scotland's latest monitoring that almost half of councils have issued surveys to parents or pupils and have an active communication strategy. Those who have not issued surveys have been engaging through parent councils and pupil forums. We would expect that these communication strategies will continue to develop and evolve. COSLA will also continue our positive engagement with the national parent bodies. The committee also asked about the difference between authorities we're taking in terms of a school-based approach in relation to their planning and those taking an authority-wide approach. As part of the agreement on the strategic framework, we were keen to negotiate local flexibility in planning, and these different approaches reflect that. These plans will be based on the jointly agreed guidance. As part of that guidance, it was agreed by all partners that there is a no one-size-fits-all approach, and local circumstances will have a significant role to play in how plans were developed. The number of days in school will be dependent on capacity, the school estate, school transport and resources available in the context of the 2-metre distancing rule. The size of an authority, approach to critical childcare, structure of support, cleansing and facilities management services and resources will all inform approaches to local planning. School staff have worked tirelessly to prepare for the blended learning approach, demonstrating their commitment to ensure that all our children and young people get the best education in these difficult and challenging times. Local authorities have also responded to the needs of vulnerable children with innovative practice in such areas as residential care, maintaining contact with families, online children's hearings and virtual assessment and care planning. No doubt we can touch on more of this in the detailed question, but I hope I've addressed many of the issues that the committee is looking to cover, and myself and my colleagues will endeavour to answer the committee's questions as best we can. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCabe. We're now going to move to questions from the committee, and can I invite Ms Ross?
Thank you, Convener, and welcome panel. Thank you, Councillor McCabe, for that comprehensive start. You've probably answered quite a lot of what we wanted to ask already. I just wanted to start off by just getting your opinions about what you think, in consultation with the Scottish Government, teachers and parents, we should expect blended learning to look like.
Well, in general, it is a mix of face-to-face learning and learning at home, and obviously the balance between that will be dependent on the resources available in each council, and we're working through those plans. We're obviously trying to develop more detail in terms of blending learning, put in more support for pupils and parents as well through that process. So we are developing the plans as we go forward, but in essence it will be a mix of home learning and face-to-face learning in school. Happy for Carrie to come in and give us a bit more detail on that.
Ms Lindsay?
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I think that's right what Councillor McCabe says, that there will be a range of blended learning, and it will be different in different places. And interestingly, we've done some surveys in some of the local authorities about what parents find useful, and it's not always the online learning. So a number of parents have come back and said that they do like the hard copies as well. But we've been looking as directors of education at a lot of the research around blended learning, and what we're seeing is that it is about how you link the home learning with the learning in school. And I think that's the difference to the opportunity of what we've seen with home learning at the moment, where the young people haven't been able to access schools in the same way. So I think the blended learning model will join the two together. We're also working on an offer through ADES for an e-learning national framework, where we would be using the good work that we've had in eSchool and Scholar that's been working across Scotland for many years, to see how we can support the senior phase more with that e-learning offer. And we're working with Education and Scottish Government to make sure that we can get that out as quickly as possible. So with the research that we have, with the knowledge and how teachers work and how they will adapt their processes, that we are confident that that will be a better model for parents, and it will meet their needs better than the current model where it's learning at home.
Thank you. So the local authority plans are obviously at quite an advanced stage, and I know that a couple of them have actually been published. But as a parent myself, when will these be made public? Because the Scottish Government has to scrutinise them as well. Is there a stage where the teachers will see them? Will they be flexible? Will teachers have autonomy, as you said, within the local authority plan, or will that be up to head teachers in schools or faculty heads? How will it work in that kind of flexible stage?
I mean, maybe I could come in initially and then Carrie could come in. I mean, a number of the plans are already in the public domain. Some are not, but a number of them are. And they are being developed very much in partnership with schools and in consultation with parents and indeed pupils. So I certainly, as a parent in my area, I know the plan for education in my area. So we're at different stages. Councils are working hard to put all the plans into place and communicate with parents, but certainly there are a number of plans already in the public domain. Carrie?
Thanks, Councillor McCabe. Yeah, I think that's right, that I think people have made their plans available and have said that they're proposals, because we all know that things may change, and I think that that's what we have to keep at the forefront of our mind, to take account of the scientific and the public health advice that's available for us. So we know that plans may change, and I think we've called it in a lot of local authorities scenario planning, because we know that that might change as time goes on and the advice changes. So yes, we have made those available for parents, so that parents can help us to help make sure that we are actually meeting the needs of what the parents' lives and what local economies might be looking for. So we have been sharing those plans, but they might not be the final plans if things change. Our plans, as Councillor McCabe outlined, will be shared with Education Scotland, and we'll work with Education Scotland from Wednesday this week to look at, are there any areas that we've not looked at within the plans at a local level? Are there things that we could do differently? And now that there may be some resource available, then it may be that we can do some things that we previously weren't thinking of because we were doing it within our existing resource. So it will very much be about how we work with our local communities, what resources are available for us, and what the local schools are able to deliver in their local communities, as Councillor McCabe outlined.
You mentioned the engagement with parents, which is obviously critical going forward. And with respect, Councillor McCabe, you're probably one of these parents that is engaged all along the way with learning, but there are a lot of parents that are not engaged and are hard to reach in normal circumstances. How do we reach these parents, often from disadvantaged backgrounds, to make sure that the plans are fitting in with their ability to help their children to homeschool?
I mean, I would be careful not to draw too many assumptions about individual people, to be perfectly honest, but I think that's something that Carrie could maybe comment on better than myself.
Thank you, Councillor McCabe. I think that's absolutely right, that we're listening to our parents, but some of our parents don't talk to us as much as others. So I think it is really important that we're using our eyes and our ears to pick up on some things in our local communities where perhaps we know that engagement is not going to be where we would like it to be with our young people. So you're absolutely right that there are some young people who are not engaging. There would have been some young people who found it difficult to engage with school before we were in this situation. We have some local authorities that have been gathering information and data on those engagement levels, although it's hard to say that that's robust, because engagement might mean different things to different people, and we don't have a definition of engagement. There's certainly one local authority that I was made aware of recently where they had gathered information that suggested that 95% of their children had engaged with either their online or their at-home learning. So we are trying hard to make sure that it's not just the 95%, because I think, as you've outlined there, that the 5% are the group of young people that we would be really most concerned about. And that's where Children's Services comes into its own, where we're actually working with our partners across Children's Services to make sure that where the families really are struggling, and those will be changing, those families, as time goes on, but where those families are struggling to engage, what can we do to support that? Local authorities have rolled out various devices and also some connectivity, so that we know that some young people, if you give them a device, they're not necessarily going to have broadband in their home setting. So people have been really creative and innovative about what they've been able to try to do to engage those families. And schools are creative like that. They will continue to do that as time goes on. But we do need to make sure that we're listening to our communities that are helping us and make sure that we're making those connections with those families that are required.
Yeah, I think Mr. Follen wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks, convener. It was just to add to what Carrie said. In fact, she actually picked up on my point about working with Children's Services and, making sure that we're making really strong links between, our Children's Services and education. I think that's absolutely vital to work with those families. And on the digital point, just to say, and you may well be aware that we're working with the Scottish Government intensively at the moment to look at how we bridge that kind of digital divide, and we support those children and young people who don't have devices, and that's work that's ongoing just now. And we're very well aware of the urgency of doing that and making sure that we've got things in place for August. So that's what that's happening at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Last question, convener. Thanks. We've been talking about autonomy for local authorities and then autonomy within local authorities for schools. But we've had some worrying reports about some blended learning only being 1 day a week, and it's making parents understandably concerned because then they have to find a way of homeschooling for those other 4 days a week. Do you see that as blended learning? And should the local authority or indeed the Scottish Government step in situations like that?
Well, I mean, in terms of the plan, I don't know what the distinction would be between the local authority and the education service. The education service is part of the local authority, so I would assume that the local authority, the councillors, elected members of councils, will be consulted in local plans, and they will, if they're unhappy with local plans, I think they'll be asking for local plans to be changed. And I don't necessarily think it's the role of the Scottish Government to step in. I think it's the role of the Scottish Government to work with collectively with councils and with individual councils to try and ensure that if they can provide resources and support, we can potentially increase the level of blended learning in each, or the level of face-to-face learning in each local authority area. I'm convinced that local authorities are doing all they can within the existing resources and the constraints they operate in to maximise the amount of face-to-face learning. But if we can get more support and assistance to do that, I'm sure every local authority in Scotland would welcome that.
Ms. Ross, are you finished? Questions?
Yes, that was my last question.
Sorry, missed that. I'm going to move on to questions from Mr. Green. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I just following on from Councillor McCabe's comments, I think, to be fair, councils have been taking quite a lot of flack in recent weeks for the plans that have been emerging. But I think it's worth putting on record our thanks to local councils working with schools and teachers. So I think they're probably trying their best in the circumstances. But it doesn't detract from the fact that parents are still anxious about the proposals, as Gail Ross said, of just 1 or 2 days a week face-to-face contact and the effect that will have on their child's education and also their ability to go back to work. Does anyone on the panel have a view on how you would categorise the levels of support that you received to date? In other words, do your members believe that they actually have enough funding and resource to deliver the government's current plans? And given comments by the First Minister yesterday that more resource might be available, do you have any indication of how much has been allocated to councils to help them deliver these plans?
I mean, I think that reality at this point in time is we are trying to deliver the plans that we are developing within existing resources, and those resources are extremely stretched at this point in time. And that's not just in education services, that's across council services. We are under enormous financial pressure. We absolutely welcome the additional resources that have come from government and the additional flexibility that government have provided in the use of some of the ring-fence funds, but there are no doubt that there are enormous challenges in trying to maximise the amount of blended learning. It's not just about finance, there are real practical issues around that as well. School transport is a huge issue for councils, but yes, the more resource available, the more potentially we can do in increasing the amount of face-to-face learning. We've had constructive dialogue with the government in recent days. We've had an indication that potentially financial support is there, and now we're getting into the detail of that, looking individually at what councils require to try and increase the amount of face-to-face learning in their councils. I don't know if Eddie wants to come in or Carrie.
No, I've not got a lot to add to that, Councillor McCabe. Thanks very much. But just to kind of reiterate that we're in a stage now where we're having very kind of positive discussions with the Scottish Government on this issue. But if Carrie wants to add anything.
Ms Lindsay?
Thanks for the opportunity. I think that maybe just to cover on a couple of the points there about the fact that we're really got our plans about a phased approach. So this is new to all of us, but I've never been in a situation where I've had to try to deliver education in the midst of a pandemic. So our plans will change, that we are trying to make sure that we're doing the best that we possibly can for our children and young people. We want them to be provided with a quality education. And that does mean that we'll need to test things out, we need to try them, and then we might be able to increase significantly what we're able to do, again, dependent on the public health advice. But at least 23 out of the 32 local authorities for their primary schools are already indicating that they're doing either 2 or more days. So there is a significant amount of work that's ongoing to see how we can increase that and when we could increase that. So I think about the support that we've been given, that we were trying to model that within existing budgets. We were given some flexibility from the government with some ring-fenced budgets, but that didn't release significant amounts of money for local authorities. We believe that from the announcements this week that there may be further resource available, which will allow local authorities now to revisit their plans and to think about what might be the possibilities going forward. And maybe just one comment about saying that local authorities have been given a lot of flack. Well, I've had a lot of really positive emails sent to my email box as well, with a lot of parents who are saying how appreciative they are, and they know that this is a really challenging time and we're trying to do our best. But there are those that also will be saying that they're not happy with the model that we put out there.
Thank you for that. No, absolutely, there are mixed views. I think everyone has appreciated it's an extremely difficult time for everyone, but nonetheless, our inboxes are full of very concerned parents as well. I would be concerned that so many councils are only looking at two or more days. I mean, surely our ambition should be to get up to 100%. And it's interesting, Edinburgh Council this week were quite public by saying that to deliver the government's plans, we need at least £30 million to do that, just to get to 50% contact, or the alternative is to reduce the social distancing requirements from the current plan of 2 metres. The panel will probably be aware of plans in Northern Ireland to reduce to 1 metre, which I suspect would increase capacity in classrooms, which might make life easier for some of your members. Does anyone on the panel have a view if that move is a safe one, or would it benefit councils in any way if we were to replicate that policy decision in Scotland?
Well, we are very much basing our plans on the 2 metre social distancing rule, and until advice from government changes, our plans won't change on that basis. Clearly, if that rule was changed, it would make it easier to increase the amount of face-to-face learning. But at this point in time, the advice hasn't changed. I certainly don't profess to be an expert in the virus and the implications of that. So we rely on government for advice. We rely on government to take decisions. And until the advice from government changes, we will continue to develop our plans on the basis of 2 metre social distance. And I don't know if Eddie or Carrie feel qualified to comment on that particular matter.
And just to interject, sorry, and I appreciate absolutely you're planning around what you've been asked to plan around, but are you doing scenario? Do you have an idea of how much additional capacity that would present you if we shift to 1.5 to 1 metre? Because the First Minister said those are active discussions, so I presume therefore councils are scenario planning and would be able to provide details, because you will have to react quite quickly if the plans change.
Well, I think that there may be limited scenario planning in councils going on, and Carrie can come in on that. But at this point in time, the primary focus is in putting in place our plans to return to face-to-face learning in August, on the 12th of August. And that's not that far away. And there is an enormous amount of work to be done before then to put those plans in place. So it's difficult to plan for things that might happen. So we're planning on the basis at this point in time is what we know. And if the government's advice changes, then yeah, we'll have to adapt our plans, but that will make it even more challenging to have plans in place for August. But if Carrie wants to come in the detail.
Thanks, Councillor McCabe. I suppose the first thing I would say is that safety is really important to us. We value our children and young people, and we want to make sure that any environment that we put into them is a safe environment. We also want to provide quality education, so we need to weigh that up in the decisions that we're making. Of course, we're looking at the resources that may be required if the distances would change, and we've started scenario planning around that. But it's quite a big tanker to shift, to move from one to the other, so it does take a wee bit of time whilst we put those plans together. But finance isn't the only answer, so there are examples in my own authority where we have transport difficulties because we have 424 buses that we already have in place. So if the 2 metre was changed to 1 metre and that was on transport as well, it still wouldn't allow us to get 100% of our children into our school buildings. So there are a number of areas that we need to look at, those practical areas, to be able to ensure that it is safe and that we are following the advice. I think, and you know, whether I would say that we should be changing the advice, I would agree with Councillor McCabe. I'm an educationalist. It's not for me to be giving that advice, that we listen to the World Health Organization, the scientific advice and the public health advice, and we'll be following that to make sure that our children and young people are safe in our schools.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And my final question on back to schools is around blended learning itself. Do you have an idea of whether we are looking at a national online platform to deliver homeschooling, or will 32 local authorities have separate learning platforms? We know a number of parents have had very little or no engagement with virtual or online schooling over the last few months, and there's a concern that if councils are left to have to deliver it themselves without any centralised approach, then there will be again a disparate result when it comes to the long-term blended learning prospects. So I'm keen to get a view on how we're going to support parents who ultimately will be teachers part-time as well.
Okay, maybe I'll bring Eddie and then Carrie in terms of that.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Councillor McCabe. Now, I think one of the things that I think we've all been keen to do is to make sure that parents can't be teachers full time at the home. So we need to make sure that we're supporting them as much as we possibly can, and that's why I talked about the digital offer earlier. And we need to make sure that that's comprehensive and that all children can benefit from that. But I know that Carrie may want to talk about eSchool. And what the IDES are doing with Education Scotland, because I think that's really important and work that had been developed by Western Isles Council.
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah, I mentioned earlier about eSchool, which is the platform that we use in the north of Scotland, but over the last few years it has actually been used across. In fact, I think there's evidence at the moment that it's been used in all 32 local authorities for some courses over the last few months. So we're building on that, and as ADES we're using that as an e-learning platform that we're going to offer to all local authorities. So we've been in discussion with directors of education across Scotland to see if there is a willingness and a desire to be able to have that as a national platform, which we're now progressing with. And we're working with Education Scotland. It has been that the eSchool and the Scholar offer has been for the senior phase subjects mostly, but we're looking to see what we can actually deliver for the broad general education and what that might look like. Education Scotland are also working on some resources for home learning, and we would imagine that they would connect in with the offer that would be the e-learning eSchool offer. But in one of my earlier answers, I also said about the fact that some of our parents say that they prefer the non-online learning, that they quite like having the hard copy resources. So I think there needs to be a balance between what we're expecting online. Some families that are reporting back to me where they maybe have 4 or 5 children in the family and the parents trying to work from home, that they don't have then 6 devices that people can use. So I think in schools, and that's what teachers are really good at, is finding ways that will work for the children in their class, that they know their class at that local level, that's where it actually works best.
Can we bring in Mr. Boland again?
Yep, thanks, convener. No, it was just to add as well, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, that part of the work that we're doing around the digital offer is around connectivity. And that's going to be, a big part of making sure that, that every council can, has got an offer. So it's not just about devices, it's about connectivity, and it's about access to the internet as well. So that is work that's ongoing at the moment.
Can I just ask a supplementary myself on the eSchool offering? We know that timetabling is in itself is one of the biggest headaches that most schools have, and you had to re-timetable based on a much reduced attendance at school. But we also know that the Education Scotland advice, or the SQA advice, is it's 160 hours of teaching for a certificate qualification in the final phases. Does eSchool allow schools to share a teacher, if you like, across different schools to deliver a curriculum? Is that shared? Can that be shared across local authority as well? Or what is the advantage of the eSchool in terms of replacing that face-to-face teaching? I think Carrie, probably for you initially.
Thank you for that question. The live teaching on eSchool is how that currently works, but it can also be recorded. So it means that those lessons don't need to be used at that point in time, and you refer to timetabling, which is one of the restrictions in a secondary school. And we're currently thinking about big blocks of time in some of our secondary schools because we don't want children moving around quite as much. So there is something about how we can use that live teaching and how we can use the recording of lessons to fit in to allow children to have the full experience of the course that they've elected to study. So you're absolutely right, we would be sharing that across local authorities, and at the moment the ask is for some staff in each local authority to be able to be contributing to the work of eSchool, so that it isn't just those in the Western Isles who started this that are teaching every other child across Scotland, although we're happy for them to do some of that, but how we're all buying into that so that we can actually deliver those lessons and to develop those courses for children online.
Thank you. Mr. Green, I think that was your final question. We'll move to Mr. Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Can I begin by asking Stephen, the 5 principles you've outlined in your joint the Educational Recovery Report with the Scottish Government, is the main principle not the missing principle and the most important principle? And that is every child.
Sorry, Mr. Neil, I think we've lost the connection to Mr. Neil again. I'm very sorry about that. And we'll try and get him back as quickly as possible. Can I move to Mr. Halker-Johnson?
Thank you very much indeed. I always seem to be drafted in when there are connection problems, which I think highlights some of the issues that are being faced by children and parents and teachers and across the country. I just wanted to very quickly highlight, we've talked obviously about some of the science advice. Of course, the World Health Organization guidance is 1 metre. And also I was interested listening to Professor Leach this morning, talking about the Northern Ireland example, and that the information, the scientific information that they were receiving was the same as the Scottish Government have access to. It's obviously just interpretation of that advice, which is obviously within the right of the Scottish Government to determine. As MSPs, we've been constantly contacted by different organisations highlighting, the issues that they face because of COVID. That's included hospitality events, hotels, and the like. It's included coach operators and all sorts. A huge number of which have obviously large capacity at the moment. I think that there was mention about resource, and I think it was resource rather than just the funding, although one is associated with the other. So I'm just wondering, even if we stay at 2 metres as the guidance, is the possibility of achieving 100% or as near as possible to 100% classroom time, normal as possible education, a safety issue or a resource issue if the resources can be put in place to achieve that?
Well, maybe I could come in first of all. I mean, I simply don't think it's realistic if we maintain 2 metre social distance to get anywhere near 100%. And it's not just about money. It would take an awful lot of money, but it would take incredible resources that I simply don't believe are available. I know that some people think they are available, and we should be able to commandeer public buildings throughout our local authority areas and have as much money as we possibly can to throw it. I just don't think that's realistic. And what we're engaged in at this point in time, within the constraints of 2 metre social distancing, is to try and see if we can, at the margins, increase the amount of face-to-face learning. Simply going to 100% based on 2 metre social distance, I think is impossible. But Carrie's better qualified than me as a Director of Education to comment on that.
Thanks, Councillor McCabe, and I would agree that the safety is the important thing for us, that we obviously are taking the advice that we're provided with from the scientists and from the World Health Organization, and at the moment that advice coming through the government, who've got access to more of that advice than we would as Directors of Education, the advice is that the 2 metres is still the safety. To go to 100% with 2 metre rule would not be possible, I don't believe. Certainly in my local authority, when I look at the buildings I have, when we look at the experience that I have with a fire in one of our large secondary schools at the beginning of this session, where we had to find places for 1,600 children, and that took a mammoth effort for all of the council to come together to actually be able to place those children. So I have 53,000 children in Fife. If you're thinking about trying to find alternative buildings, how you get the meals in there, how you get the cleaning to take place, how you make sure there's playground space for the children, how you make sure there's enough toilets, how you make sure there's hand washing facilities. So it's not quite just as simple as finding a hall or a space. It is about making sure that we can deliver quality education for these children and young people, that this is the only chance they get at education, and we want to make sure that we do get that right, and that we use the facilities in the best way possible to do that. But obviously we'll take advice about that distancing, and we'll respond to that whenever that changes, to make sure that we can get as many children and young people back in school as quickly and for as long as possible.
Thank you very much. That's extremely helpful, and I mean, I absolutely do appreciate the challenges that this is causing for everybody. I mean, you mentioned, Carrie Lindsay mentioned again the WHO advice. The World Health Organization advice is for 1 metre guidance. Is there specific guidance, as you refer to it, on education that requires, say, 2 metres, or is it that 1 metre advice for education as well? Because if you're following the advice of the World Health Organization, that would suggest that 1 metre might be an option.
No, we're following the advice of the Scottish Government, and the Scottish Government is following the advice of their scientific advisors.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that. Can I then ask? You may or may not have seen on social media today, but there's been a letter to the Education Secretary from newly qualified teachers. Could you give a bit of a kind of advice on where COSLA and individual councils are with newly qualified teachers, whether that they as a resource are being fully utilised in delivering education going forward in the blended model?
I'll maybe bring Eddie in sort of at a sort of national policy level, and then Carrie come in the sort of the detail of that.
Yep. Thanks, Councillor McCabe. I've not seen the letter on social media today, so I can't comment on that. Certainly, we work through COSLA with others to make sure that we need to maximise our workforce in this situation. But I think Carrie's probably better qualified to talk about the newly qualified teacher issue than me. But from a COSLA perspective, we're looking to kind of maximise the workforce as much as we possibly can, because we do realise, as part of this, one of the big challenges of the pandemic and delivering a blended learning approach is that we started from a point where we did have a shortage of teachers, and we now need to do everything that we can to get to a point where we can adapt to the new model. But maybe Carrie can put a wee bit more detail on that.
Thanks for that, Eddie. Yes, it's an interesting question about, why are there so many NQTs at the moment who haven't been placed in permanent posts? And I think that there's a difference between what we would take as a permanent post at this point in time and what we would take in terms of supply, because obviously we may need people now if we've got children in smaller groupings that we're not going to need in the future. So there may well be a number of temporary positions that will be offered to NQTs, and I know that a lot of local authorities are looking at doing that at the current time. I go back to an earlier response where we were talking about that the finance at this point, when we were putting together the plans, there wasn't extra finance available. We were doing that within the budget in the local authority with the flexibility that had been offered through the government from some of the ring-fence funding. So we have actually been trying to do that as much as we can within the existing council funds so that we're not putting our councils into a deficit position. So there's now an opportunity to revisit that. Many people have already done that, as I say, so we will be starting to look at what would be the case if we had more finance to be able to take on the NQTs. I know certainly in my own authority, we took on about half of the NQTs that wanted to come with us. And we had large numbers of NQTs looking to work with us, but we didn't have funding or the space for them to actually join us as a workforce. So we will be looking at that now that there's resource available.
Super, thanks very much. I've just got one more quick couple of questions. Obviously, councils can have flexibility on how they deliver, and you've talked about some of the importance of non-online learning, in terms of for some families, but largely, is blended learning going to be reliant on online learning? I.e., can it be delivered across the country or across council areas without young people having access to computers or all the required technology or the right connectivity?
I mean, if I come in first, I suppose, and just in terms of what we're trying to do, I mean, I know individual councils are making a massive effort to try and improve their sort of digital infrastructure, to upgrade it, to put in, to offer equipment, laptops to young people as well. The other day, my council approved £500,000 to improve our digital platform, but we're also in discussion with the government over the £30 million that they've set aside. They've bought 25,000 Chromebooks and there's another £21 million. So we're in discussion of the best way to allocate that resource so that we can increase the infrastructure and the availability of laptops to young people. But again, Carrie might want to come in and some of the detail.
Thanks, Councillor McKay. But I think, that the blended learning and the research that's around that is quite interesting about how important it is for the learning in school to be connected to the learning at home in some way. So that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be online. I think that there's a big focus on online at the moment, and I think that's absolutely right. We need to get that right for those young people that are using that. But there will be lots of experiences where we have teaching and learning in a school setting. We have some then work going on at home, and then I suppose if you think about that cycle of teaching and learning and assessment, so then the work can come back to school to be assessed with the teacher before their next piece of learning is planned for. So all of that planning of teaching, learning and assessment can take account of things that are not necessarily online. And as I said in a previous answer, that the survey that one of our local authorities did said that a lot of the parents actually preferred some of the non-online. And I don't think we want all of our children. This is about quality of education, quality of provision for our children and young people. We don't want them to be sitting in front of a screen the whole time. So we want them to be thinking about different ways to learn. Yes, online's one part of that, but it's not everything. So we need to make sure we take account of all of that holistically for the teaching and learning of our children.
Yeah, and this is very much my final point. I was actually just going to refer back to that. You mentioned one of the councils had surveyed, but you said there was no national definition of engagement. I've been trying to find out from the Scottish Government the number of young people who weren't able to access online learning, who were didn't have either the laptops or the connectivity, and we weren't able to get that information over 2 months. Now, if you're basing your plans for blended learning on guidance coming from the Scottish Government and also the funding streams, is there an issue there that the Scottish Government, if they can't provide that information, are providing guidance without the full knowledge of the picture on the ground.
Well, again, I'm sure Carrie can come in the detail, but I mean, councils are working hard on the ground to identify the pupils that require that support and are looking to provide the support either from within their own resources or with this additional resource when it's allocated as well. So there may not be a national picture at this point in time, but certainly councils on the ground are working hard to identify the pupils most in need of support.
But shouldn't there be a national picture? Shouldn't the Scottish Government, if they are determining the guidance that you're required to follow to deliver blended learning, shouldn't they have an idea of the picture on the ground? And we're nearly 3 months into this pandemic, shouldn't they have had a figure from yourselves, information provided from yourselves, of what is able to be delivered in terms of online learning on the ground?
Well, we are working, I suppose, on producing that figure. And again, Eddie might be able to come in with some detail on how we're working to produce a figure in discussion with the government as to how best to allocate the resource, and maybe Carrie can come in some more of the detail.
Yep, thanks, Councillor McCabe. Yep, we are, as part of the process that we're going through at the moment, we've been working with councils to understand the need in individual councils, and we're going to continue that work. And as I say, we're doing it as a matter of urgency. But we are looking to try and get a national picture from councils to pull that together to identify need.
I'm quite happy to add to that, if that's okay. I think that the responsibility of the delivery of education is a local authority responsibility, and therefore local authorities will be aware of the families that they need to support, and particularly if you take that to the empowered head teacher level within our empowered system, then head teachers and class teachers will absolutely be aware of the families that need that extra support. To gather that figure nationally, I suppose we need to think, well, what do we want that for? We certainly are looking at that information at a local level so that we can make sure that we are using any resource that is available nationally. But I don't think we would be looking for guidance or support necessarily at a national level to allow us to do that, because that's what we're doing anyway. That's what local authorities do.
You are getting that support. My apologies, but you are getting that support because you're accessing a £30 million fund that the Scottish Government is making available. So that support is coming from the Scottish Government based surely on the information that they have provided by local councils in terms of the need.
Yeah, so we work together on making sure that the resource and where the resource goes, absolutely. So the work that we've been doing through COSLA about how we make sure that resource is made available for the online aspect of that, but the non-online aspect, that's where local authorities do know their schools best, the head teachers know what they need to do for their families in their local areas to deliver that.
Okay, thank you for your answers. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Can I try and bring back Mr. Neil, who's joined us again? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Convener. I don't know what went wrong there. Can I begin by asking Stephen McCabe, there's 5 principles which were identified in the Education Recovery Group report, but is the main principle not missing? And that is that every child in Scotland is entitled to full-time, high-quality education. I mean, I'm a grandfather. My grandchildren have just been told they're going to get, from the 11th of August, 1.5 days a week at school for the indefinite future. I personally and their parents regard that as absolutely unacceptable. That is not good quality education. It's not blending education. It's bleeding education. Surely we can do far better than that for our children.
Well, I think that the reality at the end of the day is what's on offer is second best. Absolutely, it's second best, because the reality is the best for our children is to return them to full-time education in school without any requirements for social distancing to normality as we see it. But the reality is that we are being advised by the government, by the scientists, that at this point in time, children can only return to school in August on the basis of a 2 metre social distancing, and therefore it is impossible for us to provide full-time education in that constraint. I'm not quite a grandfather yet, Alec, but I'm a parent. I've got a 15-year-old son. I've got 4 children, only one that's still at school, a 15-year-old boy who's in secondary school, who needs significant additional support within that school. And he's facing the prospect of potentially 2.5 days a week across a fortnight of school. Although I would hope that the more vulnerable of our children, potentially we can offer more than that. But so nobody accepts this as a satisfactory situation. But I think the education system in Scotland is doing the very best we can to try and deliver as best a education service in extraordinarily challenging times that none of us have ever faced in our lifetime.
But Stephen, are we not coming at this from the wrong end? I mean, I listened very carefully to your introductory remarks, and basically it seems that we've said this is the school's capacity. We need to maintain for the time being at least 2 metres distance, and assuming we stick with that, but you're constrained by the capacity both in terms of buildings and staff. Could you not take a leaf out of the NHS's book, who had major constraints on buildings and staff, and what they did was they requisitioned the buildings they needed, they recruited the additional staff they needed. Now, I agree that has to be paid for by the Scottish Government, but if you listen to what the paediatricians are saying, the cost of getting your children back to school 5 days a week, not just in terms of their mental health, their physical health, their education, our future economic prospects, and our security as grandparents and parents, all of that's dependent on that happening. So do you not think the attitude should be, let us not take capacity as a constraint, but actually address the capacity issues to make sure we give our children as full-time? We're looking at the moment as though Scotland is potentially going to be the only one of the 4 nations in the UK not planning for a return, or at least trying to get a full-time return to school in August. That's not good enough.
Ali, I respect your passion for young people in their futures. I think I share that passion. I think I want to see all our young people flourish. But there's no point in me coming here and telling you or telling anybody else that what you've described is possible within 2 metre social distancing. Now, I've heard it from other people, I've heard it from people within my own political party, that we should have some sort of superhuman effort to double the school estate to ensure we can provide full-time education within 2 metre social distancing. Now, the NHS, with all due respect, built one temporary hospital that cost £43 million, which has never been used. There are around 2,500, as I understand, schools in Scotland. To imagine that we could replicate 2,500 schools is just fantasy, to be perfectly honest, fantasy. I'm sitting in my own village at the moment where potentially within my village we could accommodate half of the school roll within the local community centre, which used to be the previous primary school. But if I go 5 minutes down the road to Port Glasgow, where we've got a campus with two secondary schools and a special needs school with a school roll somewhere in the region of about 1,200, and I then go to primary schools in Port Glasgow where we've got maybe a combined roll of around 1,000, there are no buildings to accommodate half of that roll. It's simply, I'm sorry, but it's simply fantasy. And so money, in a sense, is not the only issue. If the Scottish Government offered councils a blank cheque and said, doesn't matter what it costs, go out there and double the school estate, get every single child back to school, full-term time, face-to-face learning in August, based on 2 metre social distancing, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. I think Carrie's given you some of the practical examples earlier when she talked about the practical issue of where one of the schools in Fife burnt down to how she accommodated the school roll for that. It's impossible, absolutely impossible.
But there are many areas where it can be done, Stephen, and it's maybe not necessarily in cases like the one you've just quoted in Inverclyde. In the village where there is the old school still available, surely you should use that if it takes half the pupils and get the additional teachers. I agree you've got to get the funding from the Scottish Government. And in those areas like the one you described in Greenock, can we not apply a bit of imagination, and create homework hubs, for example? Supervised homework hubs with the IT equipment to make sure every child has access to what they need to do, and ensure. I mean, 1.5 days a week is just not acceptable. We all signed up many years ago to GIFIT, getting it right for every child. This is not getting it right for most children. A bit of imagination, additions of accommodation, ideas like the homework hubs which have been tried elsewhere to help reassure teachers and other staff about security, weekly testing in every school until we get back to as normal as possible. Surely a bit of imagination needs to be applied here. I think you've just taken the capacity constraints and decided to work to those, not actually try to overcome them.
Well, I don't accept that, Alec. I think councils are trying enormously hard to try and find ways to maximise the amount of face-to-face learning. But given we've now had the offer of potential funding from the government, given that councils will now engage with Education Scotland, these are the type of areas that we can look at to both maximise face-to-face learning and provide support to young people and families. But you challenge me on, can we get schools back, can we get young people back 100% to face-to-face learning by August? No, we can't, within 2 metre social distancing.
Well, if you have to look at the other side of things, I accept there are some areas where there are physical challenges, but if you created, homework hubs, for example, supervised, that's far better than working. I mean, we know in the last 3 months that home working, by and large, has been particularly detrimental to poorer kids who are vulnerable and so on, and even a lot of middle class kids. Has been very, very difficult, and as parents go back to work, it's going to be even more difficult. We've had a report in the last 2 days from 1,500. We talk about scientific advice. Nobody seems to be listening to this scientific advice from 1,500 paediatricians. And just to quote what they say, that the risk of scarring the life chances of a generation of young people, the risks of that by not going back to something close to full-time education is a lot higher risk to young people in our country than the current arrangements for schooling because of the virus. But obviously by August, it might well be by then we are down to 1 metre. And I agree with you, you've got to plan for the worst case. We might be down to 1 metre in August, there might be a second wave in January, so you're back to where you started. So we'd need much more capacity in the system. I accept there will be challenges in particular areas. Go back to my own grandchildren, you're surely not going to tell me a day and a half is acceptable. That is not acceptable. And, round the corner from the school, there's a village hall sitting empty, doing nothing. Now, why is that not being used? Why are we not, raising our ambitions? If every other nation in the UK can do it, why can't Scotland?
I mean, I'm not going to tell you that is acceptable. I'm not going to tell you it's unacceptable because I'm not going to comment in individual cases. But the reality is that councils have faced and face enormous constraints. So that if there is the opportunity of additional funding, these are the type of initiatives that we can look at. But the reality in terms of the science, in terms of 2 metre social distancing, we are relying on the government's advice, and we'll take the government's advice on that. If that advice changes, then our plans will change. I am as passionate to get young people back to school as quickly as I can. I've got a young person who's been off for 3 months from school, who has done absolutely no online learning in that time, no online learning at all. I've managed to get him into a childcare hub one day a week. He's now attending school. The hub is in school. He's attending that 2 days a week, which is good. He needs face-to-face support. So I absolutely understand the frustrations that you've got, but we have to work within the constraints that are there. I did spend last Friday night watching the 2 hours from the committee session from last Friday when you were interviewing the Deputy First Minister, and I'm afraid some of the questions that you're posing and the challenges that you're posing to us are really challenges that you should be addressing to government and Parliament.
I would agree with that. And just going back to the scientific advice, this is my last question. If we're all following the science,
I think Miss Lindsay wanted to come in on the last point, if that's okay, if we go to Miss Lindsay, and I'll come back to you. No problem.
Sorry, Carrie.
No problem. Thanks for allowing me in. I suppose I just wanted to clarify one or two things. That I suppose firstly, I think that I'm certainly seeing staff in schools, head teachers, local authorities being hugely imaginative and creative in how they've tried to keep our children learning. We maybe haven't managed that with 100%, but if we weren't being creative and imaginative, it wouldn't be happening with even 50%. So I think that's the first thing I would say, that people are really trying their absolute best in circumstances that none of us have ever been in before. So we're doing something that's completely new to us. And second thing I would say is that our plans are our initial plans to get schools up and running. And I think certainly we've been talking in my local authority about staged or phased plans, so that we're thinking about this is the first phase, this is the first bit to get people back in, and the safety and well-being of our children and young people is hugely important to us, and we know that this is going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky for parents as well, and grandparents, as you've described, but it's certainly going to be difficult for our children and young people to come back in and to be part of that school community again. So the blended learning allows us to do a phased approach. If we've got more resource, we might be able to do that more quickly, but we need to have the support of local communities to use everybody's expertise and support to allow our children and young people to get back into school. And maybe just to finish on the idea of using other facilities, and there will be some facilities that will be suitable to be used, but I can't stress anymore how challenging that was for one school for me to get those children put into different buildings, because you had to look at toilet facilities, hand washing facilities, playgrounds. You had to look at how you could get your staff there, your cleaning staff, your catering staff. So it's not as simple when you then multiply that up by a number of different establishments. So I think we are being innovative, we are being creative, and we'll work with local communities to help us to do as much of that as we possibly can.
Two points I would make, Carrie. First of all, let me make it clear, I'm not in any way disparaging the excellent efforts of educationalists at every level to try to do what they can to see us through this. There's absolutely no question of my doing anything other than admiring the work of the educationalists. The political point, and politics is about the allocation of resources. My point is this: we've got to lift some of the shackles that you guys have on you in terms of where we can find alternative capacity, in terms of staffing, in terms of buildings, and obviously in terms of money. Because the scientific and medical advice now from the paediatricians and others is that if we don't get children back to full-time education, or as near as damn it to full-time education, the damage we're going to do to these kids is going to be far greater than the potential risk there is from coronavirus. We have to listen to that medical evidence as well as medical evidence. And the point I'm making is we've got 7 weeks to plan this. Even if it's not all going to happen in 7 weeks, let's at least plan to get our kids back safely to full-time education, working on the assumption that the 2 meters will stay, but understanding that may change between now and the end or beginning of August. But my point is this: the risk to our children now of what we're planning to do, a day and a half a week, educationally not acceptable. The mental health risks, the physical health risks, as the podiatrists say, the risk to their life chances, the risk to our economy in the medium term if these kids never get back the education they're losing. We cannot afford to do anything other than at least strive to get the kids back full time in August. Do you not agree, Stephen?
we're striving to maximise the amount of time that young people can spend in school and be supported face to face within the resources available to us at this point in time. If additional resources are made available, we can potentially increase that. I simply don't think that it is practical with retaining 2 metre social distancing to imagine that 100% of children could be back in school in August, whether you want it or whether I want it. I simply don't accept that.
But we can do much better than 30% of the time at school. And we know from the last 3 months, although well-intentioned, home education isn't there, particularly for the poorer kids who don't, even the middle-class kids, they don't have IT support from the council. So when the IT system breaks down, the whole thing breaks down. We need a much more ambitious programme. God, this is not what our kids, it's not up to scratch in terms of what our children need. Nowhere near it.
I'm very conscious of time, Alec. Are you?
I'm finished.
Yeah, okay. I think the points have been made on both sides, Mr. McCabe. If that's okay, can we move on to our next questions from Mr. Johnson? Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Well, look, perhaps I could lead off a little bit from where Alex Neil has taken us. But let me put it another way round. I mean, I have hundreds of parents who have written to me who are really very upset and very angry. And I think the reason is that the 1 day a week that many of them have been promised by our local council is well short of the 50% mark that they were expecting. And indeed, John Swinney previously said that he would like to see the level of schooling be as close to 50% as possible. And while he admitted that that might not be possible, he also said that it may be possible to exceed it in some settings. I'm just wondering if you feel, Councillor McCabe, that John Swinney should have been surprised that 50% has been so challenging to achieve for so many local authorities and so many schools.
I don't think he should have been surprised. I mean, we did have discussions through the Education Recovery Group around that very issue as to what was achievable. And I suppose the view was, in some cases, and we're seeing that in some of the plans, 100% is achievable. If you have a rural school with a small role and plenty of accommodation and sufficient teachers, you can get children, 100% of the children back. But we have such a varied school estate across Scotland as well, that the challenges faced by individual councils are different. And I mean, a lot of it may potentially be down to where you are with your school estate. I mean, our school estate in Inverclyde has been completely renewed. We have a mix of new build schools and completely remodelled and refurbished schools to a very high standard in terms of space capacities, which allows us to potentially achieve a higher level of face-to-face learning. So we're able to get, in terms of secondaries, our offer is 2.5 days on average. And in primaries, it's two days per week on average. So we could potentially increase it in primaries with some additional resources. But different councils are in different places. And I'm not going to criticise any individual council. I mean, I would just say in terms of my own council, I have had no emails whatsoever from parents about this matter, none whatsoever, and I'm the leader of the council. So if the parents in my area were up in the arms, I'd expected to have my email box flooded. In the course of the whole pandemic, I've had no emails about education matters at all. None. Absolutely none, right? So maybe they are bypassing local government. Maybe they're just going to Parliament and think all the decisions are taken at Parliament. I can understand the reaction in certain council areas, but I won't criticise any of the councils. I think they're working incredibly hard to try and support young people and to maximise learning. And if the government, Parliament can provide additional resources, I'm confident that certainly in some instances, we could potentially increase the amount of face-to-face learning. So my challenge back to you and the parliamentarians, to the government, is provide us with additional resources and we might be able to deliver closer to the 50%.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very good point. But before I go further, can I assure you, I mean, my email count is literally in the hundreds. But coming back to that resource point and the challenge to government, and I think it's a correct one. If we're looking at that 50% figure, you've already stated, Mr. McCabe, that getting to 50% is a function of social distancing, the number of teachers and other staff that we have in schools, space in schools, and money, and also transport. Now, looking at each of those variables, what will it take to get to 50%? Is that a bit of work that COSLA has done, and what is needed in each of those categories to get to 50% across the country?
Well, the dialogue is not, in a sense, looking at those categories. The dialogue is looking at the individual plans of councils, engaging with Education Scotland and the government, supported by COSLA and our directors of education, to try and see in each council area what can be done to increase the amount of face-to-face learning, and that will vary from council to council area. I don't think 50% was not a figure that was written into the strategic framework, and it was deliberately not written in because there was views that we couldn't achieve 50% with 2 metre social distancing. It's an ambition that clearly the government has set to achieve 50%. Our ambition as councils is to maximise within the constraints in which we operate is the amount of face-to-face learning. And I'm sure that if we were able to secure some additional resources, that would help. But as Carrie's pointed out, it's not just about money. It's about the practicalities. I've had a discussion with a bus operator in the past few days, and there are huge challenges for bus operators in actually staying in business throughout this pandemic because the markets have collapsed. We've tried to support bus operators through continuing payments for school transport, even when services aren't provided. But we're now potentially looking for them to substantially increase the service that they can provide, and there simply aren't enough buses. So we're talking about double runs to get children to school, opening schools earlier, closing schools later, etc. Huge practical issues around these things. So more money would be welcome, and more money can assist, but there are also enormous practical challenges that mean it may not be possible in some cases to get to 50%.
I mean, Miss Lindsay wants to come in that point, if that's okay. Thanks.
So thank you. Just to reinforce one of the points Councillor McCabe there, and then I'll come on to the point I was going to make, that the 50% wasn't in the strategic framework. It was about maximising the use of space, and the 50% seems to have been picked up in just the last few days. And I suppose I'm not aware of evidence that is around on blended learning that tells us that 50% would be the best, would be the optimum for that. New evidence is becoming available all the time, so obviously if there is evidence that tells us that, then that would be something that we should focus on. But certainly as a Director of Education and with my fellow colleagues, what we're trying to do is to deliver quality and to maximise that face-to-face contact, but not to focus on just quantity. And I think that's where the debate's not helpful. Sometimes when we're just thinking about that quantity, where we don't have evidence to say that 50% would be best for children's learning, and if that evidence became available, then obviously we would look at that. So whenever we have difference, that always creates disappointment. So people start to say one local authority is doing this or another local authority is doing that. So we have to look at what are the parameters and why are people making those decisions? And I think certainly from a director's perspective, we're trying to be really clear about why the decisions are being made. And if that's not coming across well enough, then we'll need to try and make sure we get better at that. And my last point would just be about these are induction plans, if you want to think about them in that way. They're the plans to start the process and think about how we can get our schools back to normal, or back to some sort of new normal, thinking about the well-being and the safety of our children. They're not necessarily the plans that are going to run or go on for a long time, particularly now that we know that there will be new resource to support any changes to our plans.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, I mean, I think I'd just add that it's not just in the last few days that 50% has been quoted, and I was quoting the Deputy First Minister, so it's not an unreasonable expectation that parents had. But can I just ask Councillor McCabe, if he wants us to make the case to government, we need to understand what the gap is in terms of all of those resource areas. Anyway, if I could just ask my next question, which is, when we look at blended learning, I think some of the language is perhaps unhelpful. I think people get in their heads that we're going to have whizzy, technology-based solutions, and actually a lot of it will look actually very traditional. Certainly my experience is that what we've been delivering at home is worksheets. But what I would note, and what many parents in my constituency have been noting, is that all of these materials have been generated by the schools themselves, and what we've seen is a huge replication of effort, and teachers have been doing an extraordinary effort in terms of developing this content. But in essence, we've seen the reinvention of the wheel, school by school. Surely there's a need to essentially develop some economies of scale here, and when we're developing these materials to be developed and deployed across Scotland, there should be some consistency, which I know is not necessarily the way that we would approach things normally, but in the current circumstances and given the pressures, surely there should be centralised resources to be called upon, certainly not to be made mandatory, but certainly to be used, so we don't have this extraordinary duplication of effort. I was just wondering if the panel would agree that we need that sort of national approach to the development of these at-home materials.
I mean, I agree with you that schools are making an enormous effort, have been making an enormous effort to try and meet the needs of young people, and that will continue to be the case. Education Scotland absolutely are playing a role as well, and maybe Carrie wants to comment on the role Education Scotland are playing and collectively what we're trying to do as a system.
Thanks, Councillor McCabe. I think I mentioned earlier, obviously, about the eSchool and about the scholar resources that will be available online, but you're right that there are materials that Education Scotland are developing that will be available nationally to support some of that home learning. Teachers are very creative and innovative individuals, and they also probably like a bit of control. So sometimes what we find is that even if something is provided nationally, that teachers want to shape that to make it work for them in their particular circumstances. So there's nothing wrong in that, but we want to make sure that we're reducing the workload for all of our staff within our schools so that they can access materials that might help them to deliver that blended model. We've also got regional improvement collaboratives, and I know that certainly in our collaborative we've been working on a blended learning support, advice, things that we can do, and we've been looking at how we can support digitally some of the work within our region. So there are a number of ways that we are looking at how we're not recreating that wheel to make sure that we can provide the best possible materials that are available for a home learning or the blended learning.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask one brief final question. In recent days, we've heard these plans described as a contingency. I'm just wondering if the panel could explain what they understand by that meaning of that term contingency. Is this plan A or is there a plan B?
I think this is the plan we're working on at this point in time to try to return our young people to school face to face in August as much as we can. But if circumstances change, we will need to change the plans. We are in control of this. I mean, the decisions that will affect the plans will be made by government. And if government changes its decision, for example, 2 metre social distancing, then we will need to adapt our plans accordingly. Now, there's a lot of work going into, as I said earlier, implementing the current plans, and what will continue over the summer, even when staff are on holiday. But if there's going to be significant changes, then that will obviously add to the challenges for local authorities. It's not, I think, as Carrie said, this is not the end point. This is the starting point about getting our young people back to school after most of them not been in school for months. So it's about starting to get them back, albeit on a phased basis. But ultimately, obviously, we aspire to return all of our young people to school full-time at the earliest opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to questions, please, from Dr. Allen?
Thank you very much, Convener. I'd be interested to hear from, well, everyone really, but interested to hear particularly about the issue of variety. And I think I would certainly accept and understand the reason why there is variety in terms of what can be provided from school to school. I was just keen to know what was being done around the country to engage with parents about that very issue. And particularly if you could touch just now on what some of the constraints are which explain physically why some schools are capable of doing more than others in terms of what can be provided every week. Maybe first instance bring Eddie in on that, and then Carrie can sort of follow up on the details.
Thanks very much. Excuse me, sorry. Thanks very much, Dr. Allen. I think in the case, what we have is the local plans again, so it's back to that. And in those plans, people will make they'll come up with what they need to do in the plans. And in terms of engagement with parents, we know that this has moved at pace, and I think that that's really kind of affected the way that we can engage with parents. But we also know that most authorities are doing that, and I think that will develop as we go on. But I'll ask Carrie because I think she'll be closer to that.
Thanks for that, Eddie. I suppose just maybe to touch on the last question about the contingency plans, if that's okay, Chair. But just to say that I think we're calling it different things. So you might hear the words, and certainly I'm hearing my colleagues talking about induction plans, contingency plans, staged plans, phased plans. I think they all mean the same thing, that we know that this isn't set in stone. We know that we're going to have to change this model because advice will change. And I think that is very much the message that we're giving. However, it takes quite a long time to develop a plan like this. So in my case, it's for 53,000 children across 153 schools. It's not something that you can change quickly. So there does need to be a space for us to make those changes as we progress. But I think those are the terms that we're certainly hearing. And yes, we all want to be going back to school as normal. Everybody would want that, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. So we are having to look at what are the practical barriers to stopping us having the maximum numbers that we would want in our school, which would be 100%. So transport is a real issue. If we can only get 15 children on a double-decker bus, and they can't actually do more than one run because the buses then go on to do other things after their school runs. That's a practical problem that you can't solve easily, especially in some of our island communities where we know that the buses are used for the cruise liners and for various other things, and some bus companies have gone out of business. The available space is obviously the other key issue, that if we don't have enough available space that's appropriate to use for good quality learning and teaching, then that becomes a barrier. And the availability of staff, so in some local authorities it might be that there are available staff, in other local authorities it might be that that's not the case, so that is a barrier. And not to get too practical, but toileting and hand washing are key issues that we have to look at in terms of how we keep our children safe. So when we're thinking about the safety and the well-being of our children and young people, some of these things can become barriers. And that's what we're working really hard at a local authority level within our education services and with our head teachers to try to make sure that we are getting the maximum capacity that we can use in our schools to get children and young people back as much as we possibly can.
You've neatly anticipated my next question, which was indeed about transport and buses as it relates to capacity. You rightly also mentioned this is a particular issue in island constituencies like my own, although I have to say, sadly, there are no cruise liners at the moment. Hopefully that will change at some point. I was just keen to know, you've indicated what some of the challenges are, but you've mentioned island and rural areas. Many of the young people in my constituency are, in secondary school anyway, are travelling more than 20 miles each way a day to get to school. Do we have some kind of a picture over the country of what the variety is in the problems that are being faced around transport, and whether there are any particular parts of the country or particular types of school which are going to face real logistical problems around the issue of school transport? I mean, I could briefly come in and then carry it. I mean, I certainly know that that is an issue that has been raised at causal leaders on a number of occasions by Island Council leaders, and obviously linked to that is poor connectivity in the islands as well. So it's obviously a major challenge, both transport and connectivity in island communities. But Carrie, do you want to come in the detail?
Yeah, so we've been having regular mini directors forums, as we've been calling them, on a weekly basis, and so I've been in conversations with people from Orkney and Shetland and the Western Isles about some of their transport problems. But interestingly, they're the same transport problems that I have in Fife. We're a bit like a mini Scotland in some ways, so we have some quite rural communities as well, and they do travel almost 20 miles to get to school as well. So, and we have the same difficulty in terms of trying to access more buses. So if we can only get 15 children on a bus, are there more buses available? And so those difficulties we've been working through together. We've been talking to each other about that, been trying to support each other to think about solutions. We haven't come up with where we can buy new buses from yet, but that's the kind of thing that we're thinking, how we can help each other to think out of the box about what might be possible. But you're absolutely right, transport in some authorities is an issue. In other local authorities, transport won't be a problem at all. And I suppose that's where you start to see the differences in terms of how we need to respond to the barriers to be able to maximise what we're trying to do for our children and young people.
Finally, you've all expressed some scepticism, I think, it would be fair to say, about the idea of temporary or additional buildings. I can understand why it's not possible to find 2,500 additional buildings, but again, are local authorities working with each other to identify which areas of the country, or not which areas of the country, but which individual schools do have that option? As others have said, I appreciate the challenges logistically, and we're never going to come anywhere close to what's needed. But there are, as others have pointed out, churches and village halls around the country which may be usable, and I just wondered what coordination was taking place to try and identify whether any of them were usable or not.
Carrie, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so again, that's actually one of the conversations that we've been having as directors. So we have been talking about, quite a number of people have been contacting me about what we did do when we had our woodmill fire, to say, you know, what were the barriers to doing that, what was the resource required. So we certainly are trying to support each other and thinking about those creative ways to use the buildings. And I think that probably we need to think how we can maximise each individual local community in terms of the use of its assets. I think that's more challenging to do when you've got boundaries between local authorities. That's quite difficult to say. You've got to try and bus. So again, back to my example of the fire, we tried to bus children possibly to another local authority. Was that going to work? The distances made that really difficult. Getting staff there made that really difficult. So it needs to be done at that local level to look at the facilities that you have available and what will be appropriate to be able to use to deliver that quality learning and teaching.
I mean, if I could maybe come back in, I mean, I think we need to understand that over the last decade or so, councils have been rationalising their school estate, closing schools and, yeah, in cases, refurbishing, building new ones. And in my council case, our capacity in schools is running, it's very high, probably over 80% in most cases. But on top of that, we don't have the number of public buildings that people actually think we do have in our communities anymore, because a lot of them have been closed, whether that be through closing community centres due to austerity, etc., or indeed church congregations closing and things like that. So actually, people might perceive there to be a lot of public buildings out there that could be used, and even if practically we could use them, there are a lot are not available. I mean, there isn't the amount of extra accommodation people think there is.
Okay, Dr. Allen, you finished. Thank you very much. I'll move to Mr. Gray. Thank you.
Thanks very much, convener. And I'm sorry, I want to return to this contingency plan, because Carrie said language is really important, and I think it absolutely is. And in Parliament, all of this, we've been told that blended learning is a contingency plan for going back in August. That's what we've been told. And that implies that there is some other plan for going back in August, which is different to that. But I just want to ask Stephen. Stephen, you are the co-chair of the Education Recovery Group, along with the Deputy First Minister. Blended learning isn't a contingency plan for August, is it? It is the plan.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, at this point in time, it's the plan. At this point in time, the government advice is 2 metre social distancing. We can't therefore accommodate 100% of our pupils in school. Therefore, we have to have a blend of face-to-face learning and home learning. And that's the plan at this point in time. But if things change, then the plans will need to change. But as Carrie's highlighted, it's not easy to quickly change plans as well. When we'll be sending our school staff, term time school staff, away in holiday. I don't think many of them will be going too far in holiday within the next week. And basically, they're going away on the understanding that the plans that are being developed, they have seen, are the plans that they'll be implementing come August. So if things are going to change, they need to change quickly. I think realistically, blended learning will be the plan in place in August. Then the issue becomes how over time things evolve and change and in what time frame or time scale that they change.
Well, I think
I missed that.
Made a compelling case, Stephen, for the efforts which are going in to deliver this blended learning plan by teachers, by local authorities, and so on. I mean, do you think those involved in trying to put these plans in place would have been a bit taken aback to be told this week that this was just a contingency plan that they were working on?
I think so, yeah. I think from the reaction I've had across the system, yes. I think to be perfectly honest, and I think that the danger is people are, given the amount of effort people are putting into this, the danger is there's a bit of demotivation on the back of that.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. One of the other things that we're told in Parliament is that local authorities should be using imagination and innovation and every possible resource to try and maximise face-to-face school time. And one aspect of that is using other premises, and we've explored that quite a lot. The other aspect is taking on additional teaching staff, either bringing back retired teachers or new teachers coming through. And we touched on this briefly around the issue of newly qualified teachers. We are being told by newly qualified teachers that they are not able to get employment. And Carrie, I think you said that in Fife you were only able to take on half the newly qualified teachers who were looking to work in Fife. Can I just ask, is the reality anybody anywhere bringing back retired teachers, employing new teachers, taking on more probationers than they would have? Is that happening anywhere?
Carrie, do you want to come in on that?
Happy to come in on that, Councillor McCabe. I think, yeah, what I was referring to earlier was the fact that we were trying to develop our models within our existing budgets. So obviously to take on more staff at that point was probably, we might take on some, but we weren't going to take on large numbers. Now that we think that there may be some more resource available, we're not sure what that looks like yet, but certainly that's something that we would be considering. And I think what I was saying as well is that we wouldn't be taking on these staff on a permanent basis. It would be supply staff or temporary staff, because we're not going to need them. Well, if these are contingency plans, if the advice changes, and that's the big question for us, if the advice changes, and we need to look at our plans differently. So whether people are starting to use those that have been retired and come out, I couldn't answer on questions because that's something that GTC have just done quite recently. So I couldn't answer as to whether or not that's actually been taken up by some local authorities. Currently that's not been taken up by my local authority, but that's not to say that it wouldn't if we were in a position where we needed to do that.
But the trouble with that is, in their letter, the newly qualified teachers say that to be taken on to supply is equivalent of being offered a 0-year contract. And for many of them, what that means is they'll have alternative employment and other professions. So at a time when we're trying to bring our pupils back maybe only 50% of the time, these are newly qualified, enthusiastic, motivated teachers who were turning away. Is that not the case?
I don't think we're turning away. We've been using some of
they're
these
going to go and do something else. That's what they're saying. They're going to go and do something else.
So we've certainly been using some of our people in our hubs and various things over the last wee while. They have been volunteering to do some of that. If we have the resource and if we have the requirement to take teachers on, then that's absolutely what we'll do. And obviously, if the plans are changing in any way, if we have further resource, then we will look to be employing more teachers. Whether that's a supply teacher or whether that's a permanent teacher, you'll understand that if we took on large numbers of permanent staff that we no longer required, then they would be in a difficult situation at that point because they wouldn't then have a post. So I think that is quite a complex situation to be looking at, and we need to be providing what we need to deliver the blended models that we have planned for at the moment, looking for future models and working with our NQTs to make sure that we are giving them the support that they need and the advice that they need about their futures.
I think the trouble, as complex though it may be, it looks very simple from the outside, that here we have newly trained, qualified teachers, keen and eager to be teaching, and we can't give them a job. But let me ask a final question about resources, because we're also told that local authorities have been given flexibility to use the funding which was provided to deliver 1140 hours childcare expansion in order to cope with this emergency. And I have to be honest and say that I don't understand that, because the requirement to provide 1140 hours early years provision has only been delayed, as I understand it. So councils are still going to be required to deliver that level of provision. So it seems to me those resources are going to be needed. So I wonder if anyone on the panel can explain to me how that resource is actually available, for example, to employ these newly qualified teachers.
I mean, in terms of the issue with newly qualified teachers, I've seen that letter circulating on social media last night, and as part of the discussions we're having at a national level, staffing will be a key issue, and obviously we can look at that issue. In fact, it has been raised by the teaching trade unions as well, so we will certainly look at that. Carrie, do you want to come in on the other point?
Yeah, in terms of early learning and childcare, I'm going to use the word complex again. I don't mean that to be patronising in any way, but the early learning and childcare offer of 1140 hours, which has the statutory requirement for that, has obviously been taken away for now. And you're right that we will still be planning to deliver 1140 as the year goes on. But in nurseries and early learning and childcare settings where you employ people throughout the year because you're taking in an intake of children as you go throughout the year, then the staff that you may require because you're not delivering 1140, you will be able to reduce that number and you will increase that over the year as more children come in and as you're able to open up to 1140. So some of that is a projection about how long you might not be running the current models. So if people have decided they can't deliver 1140 and they've gone back to delivering 600, then they might have had staffing available for delivering that 1140. That will be different now because the staffing that they will require because of the physical distancing or the bubble groups for early learning and childcare will be different. So they'll be working through that just now, but it does mean that there will be some availability of funding, but it will not be significant amounts necessarily in different places. Also, if there's been a delay in the buildings, then it might be that money is being looked at differently in terms of how local authorities might use that going forward. So that would be the flexibility within that budget.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that flexibility is fairly limited, and quite a number of councils would have actually been in a position to deliver 1140 hours come August anyway, and will have recruited the staff in many instances. So there may well be some additional funding, but it's not sufficient to meet the issue that we're facing.
Mr. Gray, do you want to come back in?
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move to questions from Ms. Wishart, please?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, panel. I'd like to ask about teacher workload and how they're going to be expected to balance the workload between class and remote learning. We know that teachers in Scotland work long hours already. At the end of a long day in class, they're going to be turning to their emails and finding much more awaiting from them after from the pupils that they've not been teaching in school that day.
I think that's one for Carrie.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Councillor McCabe. I think teacher workload's always an issue for us, and having been a teacher for many years, sometimes teachers are their own worst enemies because they want to do a really good job for the children and young people, and I think that's what you're seeing across our local authorities and schools just now about trying to get it right for our children and young people. So yes, it does mean that if they're thinking about delivering in a class, so if we go back to thinking about the 50%, which is not something I like to talk about, but if we're thinking about maximising the opportunities for our children and young people, if you've got face-to-face contact for 50% of the time with half of the children, you can see that that means that you have 100% contact during that week. And it doesn't allow for those teachers then to be providing materials for that home learning in the same way. It might be linked to the classroom practice, but it's not giving them perhaps that time. So some of the models that had been developed were allowing for a bit of that time to help teachers. So this is new to them as well. It's new to us, it's new to them, and to help them have a bit of capacity. And again, that's why it would be a phased model. You might not need that capacity after, don't know how long, but the first wee while. So certainly teacher workload is something that as directors we talk with our unions all the time about trying to make sure that we're supporting them to be able to deliver that blended learning model in the best way possible for our children and young people, but also taking account of our staff well-being, and that is really important. We can't run our schools if our staff go off sick, so workload is really important for us to be addressing in that way.
Thank you for that answer. That leads to teachers with caring responsibilities, and we know that there's quite a high level of teachers who have caring responsibilities. Last week, the Education Secretary told me that, and I quote, teachers will be defined as key workers and there'll be a requirement to provide childcare support to meet their needs. But I just wondered if you could clarify what, in terms of the hubs and how, well, if you could just confirm what is actually in place for teachers now, what the arrangement might be, what it might look like. Might it be limited to single parents or those with a partner who's also a key worker? I think we need some clarity around it.
Maybe Eddie could start off in that one, and Carrie could give some.
And I know that Carrie, thanks, Councillor McCabe, and I know that Carrie will want to come in on this one. I mean, I'd just briefly say that we're absolutely aware of the, when we started in the emergency phase, we set up the hubs and we had the kind of key worker categories. There is now, we have moved on into this recovery phase, and we're currently doing a bit of work with the Scottish Government and with ADES and with partners to look at key workers, and to look at the categories of key workers and the kind of tensions and the complexities of that as well. And I know that ADES have been doing a bit of work on it and a bit of thinking about it as well. So I'll ask Carrie to comment.
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah, it's quite a challenge for us, this one, isn't it? Because everybody has childcare or caring responsibilities, whether they're in the teaching profession or any other profession. And the key worker status was brought about at a time in an emergency, as Eddie referred to. So we're looking forward to seeing the work that will come out that's reviewing that will say what are key workers now that we're moving into phase 2 and then possibly phase 3, because it can't be everybody who's going back to work. Otherwise, we should just have all of our children back in schools. And our schools are not about childcare. Our schools are about learning and teaching, about allowing our children to progress in their learning. So in the emergency phase, the teachers and education staff, they were considered key workers because they were working in the hubs. So that's different. That will stop after the holidays, or before the holidays, I should say. And then what will happen, and we call them children's activity centres, most places call them hubs. What will happen is that it will be the key workers over that summer holiday period that will be able to access that. But then as we move into the new phases, we need to consider what's possible. So we've talked about trying to maximise the face-to-face time for our children and young people to be in school settings. If we then say that all staff who work in a school, that their children are all considered key workers, then we won't be able to take the other children in for 50% of the time, if that's a number that people like to refer to. So there is something about being really clear about the purpose of what we're offering in terms of the school offer, and if there are other childcare offers that need to be offered elsewhere. And we have been having quite a lot of discussion with directors around that, and I know that it's something that is a pressing concern as to how we find that extra capacity at 2 metre distancing for childcare staff who have childcare responsibilities.
Thank you. That was my final question.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. Can we move to questions from Mr Greer?
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to just return briefly to this point around newly qualified teachers and just ask a question of Carrie, and feel free to be brief because we have been over this quite a bit, but just given that we already had a shortage of teachers in Scotland, there already weren't enough teachers, that acute issues in certain subjects, primary class sizes being too big, etc., etc. That was before we were faced with this situation of blended learning and a significantly increased need for teachers. So can I ask if the situation is as I understand it, that newly qualified teachers aren't being recruited for permanent positions because councils, despite needing them, don't know if they'll have the money to pay them until the government can confirm what this extra resource will actually be?
Want me to come in on that?
Yes,
Yes. Sorry, thank you, Claire. I don't think what we're saying is that we're not taking on people because we don't have the resource. I think what we're saying is that within the plans that we developed, at that point we didn't know we had extra resource that might become available. So when we were developing the plans were around the existing resource. So if there are now, if there is more resource available, we'll look at how that might possibly work. I think that the need for NQTs, if you look at your staffing that you have in your local authority, roles are dropping at the moment in terms of birth rates of children, not in every place, and certainly in parts of Fife they're increasing, but generally the birth rate has gone down a bit, and obviously we have an increase in the teachers that came through in the last cohort. So people are looking at what they need to fill the vacancies that they have in their schools. And then it would be extra staffing. And it's not that we're not taking any NQTs. I wouldn't like people to go away with that impression. We are employing a large number of NQTs. We're just not employing all of them at the current time. But we will look to see if we have further resource, how we would be able to make sure that would help us to maximise that face-to-face contact.
So to follow that point on, that there's still a question then about what this additional resource actually is. So councils are not yet in a position of knowing what the extra resource is and being able to make recruitment decisions on that basis. Because my concern then would be that if it is still some weeks before there's clarity around that and before staff are recruited, we are putting newly qualified teachers into their first year of whether it's a permanent position or a 1-year temporary contract, whatever it might be, that teachers are going to be recruited and placed in a position of starting immediately before a very complex and challenging term start. So they won't have had the weeks that would be required to prepare their work, because councils don't yet know if they have the resource to recruit these people, and they may not know for a number of weeks.
I'm happy to come back in on that because it's a case I want to point to. Certainly, we take large numbers of both probationers and newly qualified teachers. I think last year we had over 300 probationers. I met with them all during the summer holidays last year, and they'll be the people that are our NQTs this year. that we would always make sure in local authorities that we're providing them with that support in the in-service days that they would have at the start of term. So that would be available for us to do that. I don't think that there would be using their whole summer holiday to be preparing for that. So if we're making changes over that summer holiday period, then I think we would still be in a really good position to support those members of staff, perhaps along with some of our probationers, because the NQTs didn't fully finish the time that they would normally have had in school to prepare. So we'll be thinking about ways that we can support those people if they're coming back into work in our schools, most definitely.
Thank you. And sticking with this wider point around additional resources, and I assume that Councillor McCabe, you're probably the best person to answer this. Could you confirm what clarity, if any, that there actually is around additional resource at the moment, and what the challenges are with a delay to that? So I'm thinking particularly in terms of, there's been much discussion of the requirement for additional facilities. Well, if you're to use community centres, libraries, church halls, etc., as temporary school facilities, upgrades would need to be made. Many of these buildings are, they're not even controlled entry. They're not safe enough to just become a school overnight. Therefore, that work would need to be done before schools return in August. And for the work to be done, there needs to be an understanding that there's going to be the resource there to pay for it. So what are the implications? What are the challenges of not having certainty over the additional resource? And do you have an idea of when there will be certainty? What is this process beginning to look like about allocation of additional resource?
I mean, as I think you've alluded to the challenges in your question, we are engaging now with government. There clearly has been a public indication from government now that additional resources would be made available. The Deputy First Minister and myself have had discussions, but there are detailed discussions taking place at officer level, and I think Eddie's probably best placed to give us a bit more of the detail on that. But it certainly is urgent. I mean, if that money is available, we need to be sitting down, scrutinising the plans as they are, looking at ways in which we can increase the amount of face-to-face learning, and then identify the resources that are required for that. So time is not on our side. We need to move forward on this pretty quickly. Eddie, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Councillor McCabe. Yeah, certainly, this is something that we'll be working at pace on. And we've got an education recovery resources group, which includes representatives of local government and the Scottish Government. We're working at pace through that group to understand what the resource requirements are. And we're also working, pretty quickly to get information in from local authorities as well on what they see as the resource implications of this. And many of the things that we've talked about today are the kind of top lines there. That's about transport. It's about infrastructure changes. It's about staffing. So we're aware of this. COSLA have been engaging with local authorities to get a sense of what they need. We should have that information very soon. And also we're engaging with government to, because we've clearly had an offer, of potential additional resources, and we're engaging with government urgently to understand what that is and what we need. So it's kind of matching those two things up.
Thanks. And to move on to another topic, and I'm not entirely sure who'd be the best person to answer this, related to the questions Beatrice Wishart's just asked around childcare issues, for teachers themselves. There are many teachers who will work in one local authority but live in another. Their children will go to school in another. I'm already getting concerns from them that their children's timetable for being physically in school and theirs are not lining up. But even on a much wider level than that, I'm also receiving concerns from parents who have children in different school settings, early years, primary, secondary, particularly that primary-secondary split, or maybe having a child in a special school and one in a primary or a secondary setting. And for within a family, the timetables to not line up. Could someone maybe give a little bit of detail or explanation of what discussion is taking place between local authorities on any attempt at alignment, understanding the challenges there, and what, if any, guidance there is on consistency of timetabling for families in that situation?
I think that's one for Carrie.
Thanks, Councillor McCabe. I think all parents that are going to be returning to work are going to have childcare issues. That's absolutely true. And we need to think about how we work together in local communities to support that. And there's some really helpful advice actually on the, I think it's the Parent Zone, the government's parent website, that actually suggests that we should be thinking about how we can work together in local communities, particularly now that we can be in more than one household, and that we can support each other with some of that childcare, because the numbers that are going to need childcare are not going to be something that we're going to be able to provide essentially as an education service or a childcare service. So, but you're right, the family groupings is something that a lot of parents have certainly been saying to me, and I think in discussions with my directors, I think everybody's looking at how we support families within this. However, it would have to be said, this isn't easy. We are innovative, we are creative, but we don't have a magic wand. And to try to track children from nursery, primary and secondary in a family grouping to give them the option of absolutely the same days is difficult. I think what some people are doing is they're definitely looking at what they can do with nursery and primary, but they're not necessarily being able to match that up to secondary if that's going to give too many permutations of the same different modellings that they need to do. So I think that people are trying really hard to make sure that the family groupings are taken account of, and they're asking parents to tell us if we have particular reasons that we need to consider certain groupings together. So that is underway, and that people will be given information about that, obviously, as the models go out to parents.
Thank you. Just one very brief final question then, just to clarify that. So that's essentially being done on a council by council basis. Is there any particularly strong guidance or attempt at coordination between councils on that for a level of consistency, or is this something that is being left entirely to each local authority to make the best arrangements for them?
Carrie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. We have discussed that as directors about what we would do around that. We haven't come up with an answer, I'd have to say. That's not something at the moment that we're able to look at how we can match across the local authorities. We are talking about that, and if we have some way that we think that is possible and will support people, then we'll certainly try to do that. But it's an early stage of discussion around how we might be able to support each other across local authorities in that way.
Thanks, I understand it's incredibly complex. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a final question in this area, if you don't mind, and it's born of somewhat of frustration, because we've been told that the emergency plan was agreed across, with consultation with local authorities, with government, with teaching unions, with parents. But I'm a wee bit confused about what I've heard today, because my understanding of the use of extra buildings was, I don't think any of us would realistically expect that learning and teaching to be replicated in these buildings. And we've talked about the difference between school and home, but is there not could these extra buildings not be used for a sort of support area where those pupils who were able to attend there would have access to things like technology and internet and supervision, but not necessarily a replication of learning and teaching in them, but would give parents a lot of confidence that the work is continuing in that setting, and obviously teachers can interact with them remotely to that setting as well. And I would just like some reassurance about whether that has actually been considered, because I think the expectation was that these extra buildings would be examined and brought into use, and now what we're seeing is, and what I'm hearing is, that that's not going to be a practical option for learning and teaching.
I mean, if I come in first, I don't think it's not a practical option. It's potentially a practical option at the margins, but not on the scale that some people obviously view it to be. I mean, as part of the strategic framework that we will look at potentially expanding the school estate through utilising other premises. But when you get down to the practicalities of it, there are huge challenges in terms of addressing that. But I'm sure that councils will look at the potential options for homework hubs or support hubs in terms of providing the type of service that you're talking about. I think Carrie wants to come in.
Thanks, Councillor McCabe. Yeah, you're absolutely right that when people are looking at that, I don't want to give the wrong impression that if that's what you're picking up, Claire, I apologise if from what I've said, but I think what I'm saying is that you can't do that on a large scale, that's where it's really just not practical. So, for example, we have some very large primary schools and we're looking at local buildings beside them to be able to provide the model that we would want to provide to maximise support in those particular areas. And I think you're right that, you know, there are different facilities that we might use for different purposes, but that will mean if we use them for, say, homework clubs, and I know some people are thinking about that, maybe for the senior phase, to be able to give them a bit of support for some of their qualifications. If we do it on that basis, then it does, if you can only do it where you have a building, then again it creates that difference, because if you don't have a building in one village that you're doing, you know, and you're doing it in another village, so we want to try to make sure that we've got some equity in what we're offering to our children and young people, but we are trying to maximise the use of the buildings that we have for whatever purposes, and local authorities will be looking at that, they will be examining that, and if they've got the resource to help them and support them to do that, then they'll make the best use they possibly can.
Thank you. We have two more topics to touch on, and I've a member who hasn't been in at all yet. So I'm going to move to topic number 3, but we will come back to early learning and childcare, which was touched on already. But could I bring in Miss Mackay?
Panel. We know that this has been a particularly difficult time for vulnerable children and their families. Jim Thulis said last week that schools are going to have a challenge in identifying children who may need more support as they return to school due to the impact of lockdown. And he said schools will need to develop a completely new system and a completely new understanding of the lives and the lifestyles that young people have experienced during the present period. So can I ask whether there's a clear and consistent understanding of a vulnerable child, whether you believe local authorities have delivered and are delivering sufficient and appropriate support to vulnerable and deprived families?
Maybe if I briefly kick off. I mean, I think councils have been doing a tremendous amount of work to try and support vulnerable families during this pandemic. Obviously, the childcare hubs are one way, and we obviously try to encourage as many families to send their children to the hubs as possible. But there's been an awful lot of engagement out with that, and direct contact, telephone calls, visits, food parcels, etc. So I think there's been a tremendous effort to try and engage and support vulnerable families. But there's no doubt that is a huge challenge and will continue to be a huge challenge going forward. And obviously there have been discussions around the definition, and I think we've recently at a national level revised the definition around vulnerable families. But maybe Carrie or Eddie can come in with some more detail.
Talk a wee bit about the definition. Certainly in May, the Children and Families Collective Leadership Group, which is chaired by Solus and the Chief Social Work Officer, they worked at and includes wide representation from the third sector and social work and local government. They worked up a kind of worked on a consistent kind of definition. And in broad terms, the definition includes children who require support through more than one agency. And it's worth me kind of reading from this, I think, so that we all understand what that is as well. It's including those who have a child protection plan, are looked after at home or away from home, on the edge of care, have additional support needs where significant and coordinated support is required, affected by disability as well. And I think, in local authorities, we've been absolutely focused on the need to support many of these children. And if you look at we also get a report on contact with children who have a child protection plan, and up to the 10th of June, 97% of children with a child protection plan had been seen by a professional in the last 2 weeks. And in addition to that, between the 4th and 10th of June, 68% of all children with a multi-agency plan had been contacted by a professional in the last week. So I think we can see that, you know, local authorities are working really hard and totally aware of the pressure on vulnerable families. We've also been doing quite a lot of work on digital, so the children's hearings system has been done virtually. In terms of multi-agency assessments, they've been done virtually as well. So we've been making good use of technology. And I think another key point that's come out as well is that, you know, and certainly anecdotal evidence tells us that, you know, a lot of families have, you know, we're seeing much more resilience within families as well, you know, and those families, you know, who are under pressure but are really resilient and having to deal with this. And that's something that's coming across from social work colleagues in local government and people in the third sector as well. But Carrie will have a good bit of detail about what's happening locally too.
Thanks, Eddie. I'm a director of education and children's services, so obviously I've got a real insight into the vulnerable families, not just from an education perspective, but from a social work perspective too. And I think it's one of the things that local authorities are good at, and working across our community planning partnerships to make sure that we do prioritise our vulnerable children. And I know that in local authorities we've got good data. We've been gathering data about which children have been seen. Eddie's given you some of the kind of national data that we've been gathering. We've also been looking locally at, you know, who is seeing which children. So is it a health visitor, or is it a school nurse, or is it a teacher, or who's had contact with that child? So those are the services that we've still been delivering. We've still had our child protection processes in place, our children's hearings processes in place. All of those things have been in place. So that is very much about the children's services approach, and that will continue as time goes on when we get back to a different norm going forward. And I think that as well as the families that we've seen that are maybe struggling a bit, we've also seen, and I've certainly seen this through my children and families teams, that some families have demonstrated an amazing resilience in this because they've had a different way of living their lives over the last wee while, and they've supported each other, they've come together, and they've been very resilient. So we need to work with our families. This isn't about what we do to families, this is about how we work with the families to make sure that we're listening to what they need. What is it that they need? And that we're vigilant and looking out for the signs in families that we might not have seen as vulnerable before. And I think that as the economy is changing and we're seeing a lot of unemployment, then certainly we need to start thinking about those families that are coming forward and the range of support that we're offering, so that we make sure that we are vigilant, as I say, to the needs of all of our children and young people.
Thank you for those answers. One of the most impacted group of people during this pandemic have been children with additional support needs and their families. Aber Lauer's submission to the committee says families with children with autistic spectrum disorder are particularly struggling with lockdown and the consequential impact on behaviour as a result of disruption to routines and increased family stress. Can you outline how young people with complex needs are being supported at home and in hubs? And Councillor McCabe, in your opening statement, you said Education Scotland were monitoring arrangements. Does that include ASN pupils in schools? And will this information be published? What will we know about the monitoring that they've been doing?
I mean, I think in terms of that specific point, it was they were looking at the plans that councils had in place for the return to face-to-face learning, and that will obviously include the ASN sector as well and the ASN schools. So I'm sure Carrie can come in on the detail of how we're supporting. But I mean, I know from personal experience, I've got a child with on the autistic spectrum disorder, and I know the support that I've received and he's received from both the council services and the third sector as well. And I know the challenges only too well. But again, I think that there is a lot of support being given both by councils and by third sector organisations working in partnership with councils. But Carrie, do you want to come in some more detail?
Yeah, similarly, I have a personal experience. My nephew's on the autistic spectrum. He's an adult now and he lives in specialist provision, but I know for him it's been really challenging, and we've had to use a lot of online things to support him. So I absolutely understand that. And for some of these families, this is a really challenging time. A number of local authorities have kept their special schools open. So certainly in Fife, we've had 2 special schools open for the last 3 months, and I know that a lot of my colleagues have done the same where they have special schools. And we've also been allowing parents to have access to the resources that they may have been using or used to using in the schools, that the young people have had those resources delivered to their homes so that they're able to continue with some of the learning. So that might be particular adaptations or technology supports that they could have. So we also have our educational psychologists who've been really active in providing support directly to parents in a number of authorities. Again, we've done that and it's happening elsewhere. And our support and learner services, where they would be in direct contact. So I know in some of the other local authorities that a lot of staff have been in direct contact to see if the families need extra support. So it's absolutely true that we talk about vulnerable children. There are lots of different groups of vulnerable children. We need to think about our young carers, our looked after children, our children with additional support needs, and our children who really are struggling through their social problems or their poverty situations that they find themselves in. So we are aware to those, all of those groupings and making sure that we're providing as much as we possibly can in the circumstances that we're in. But I think that's where the children's services aspect of working together is really important. And the hubs have been able to provide a bit of support for that going forward. And I think now that certainly over the few weeks that the schools have been back in, they've been able to provide a bit more support from staff on that too, because now that we have the summer holiday period, it's another time where it's quite challenging for some of these families. And I know that, again, people are thinking about their respite services, the support that they might have had through social work, and how can they step those up again as we move through the phased return to school and the phased route map.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I invite Jamie Halcrow-Johnson? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. Just a very, very quick question. I'm conscious of time. I attended a meeting or an online meeting with the Scottish Youth Parliament's Education Committee, and one of the issues that came up there was mental health. Their lockdown, lowdown survey showed that 31% of respondents had concerns about their mental health. And that's obviously something that's likely to only increase as we continue with restrictions and as they come back to school. So I'm wondering what in both the short and medium term our education bodies and councils and schools can do to support mental health, given a lot of the support from the NHS and CAM services haven't been available.
Maybe initially I can come in and then Eddie and then Carrie. I mean, mental health clearly is a huge issue. It was a huge issue before the pandemic, and obviously there were a number of national initiatives being taken forward at that time. And I think the pandemic will only have reinforced the need for that increased need. So maybe Eddie wants to touch on where we are in the sort of national picture, and Carrie can come in some more detail about operationally how councils are supporting young people in particular during this period.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Councillor McCabe. We were working, before the pandemic, we were working quite closely on the issue of mental health with the Scottish Government and other partners. And I think, as you've just said, Councillor McCabe, we recognise, that challenge has become even greater. We did have, obviously, issues with children and young people's mental health before the pandemic, and that's been intensified now. And we're continuing to work with the Scottish Government and other partners in that area. But I think what locally, professionals locally will be very, very aware of this. And Carrie, I know, has done some work on this.
Thanks, Eddie. I suppose I agree with both Councillor McCabe and Eddie have said that we know that mental and emotional well-being, as I like to refer to it, we want our children to be emotionally well, and we know that that's a struggle for large numbers. And in the previous question, we talked about some of the groupings where that's a particular issue, but not only in those groupings. society is quite a difficult place to grow up as a young person at the moment. So we are alert to the fact that we need to be thinking about the mental and emotional well-being of our young people. And I suppose that what I would say is that we're thinking of a recovery curriculum. We're thinking about how we can make sure that we take children from where they're at. We're not going back in to suddenly deliver absolutely what they might have expected if they'd come back after the summer holiday period. So this will be a recovery curriculum that takes account of the emotional well-being of our children, takes account of where they're at, what experiences they've had, how they're coming back into school, takes account of their anxieties, and a lot of it will be focused on their well-being and making sure that we can build up their well-being and their resilience if that has had a knock over this period of time. We've been gathering information from young people, so although we haven't had them in our buildings and we're not seeing them face to face, we have been gathering information, and Young Scot did a survey and local authorities are doing their own surveys, and the young people are telling us that they're struggling, and they're telling us that they want to be with their friends. And so some of the anxieties that they have will be alleviated quite quickly once they see that they can get back to being with their friends and getting that support network that's important to them. But we will also have other things in place. So in Fife, we call it Our Minds Matter. We have a mental and emotional wellbeing framework for our children and young people and for our staff, because our staff wellbeing is going to be equally important because they can't support the children and young people unless they're well. So we'll certainly be looking at that, as will other local authorities who have a range of different frameworks and resources in place. And the educational psychologists will absolutely be key to supporting this work. And I know that they've been providing resources and materials that are on lots of local authority websites currently to try to support schools, to support families, and crucially to support our children and young people as they come back in. So this is an area that everybody has been working on. I've seen lots of information around this that's been going out to the head teachers, certainly in my local authority, but I have also seen it across Scotland. So we know that that is something that people are taking very seriously and want to work with our young people to give them the best chance to get back into something that they possibly can.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. I'm just moving to our final area of early learning and childcare, and I'd like to bring in Mr. Green. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. It's been a long session. I'll keep my questions short. I'll start with a simple one. How many of Scotland's 32 local authorities are still planning to deliver 1140 funded childcare hours? And out of those which aren't, why aren't they?
I think Eddie, bring Eddie in the first instance on that one.
I'm afraid I don't have a number to give you on those who are delivering 1140. I don't know if Carrie will, but I know that there are obviously councils who are doing that, and for others who won't be, there'll be different pressures for them. It'll be, whether that'll be staffing, or whether it might be accommodation as well. We just produced guidance on Monday on the opening of ELC settings. And the aim obviously is to provide as much support to as many people as possible, as much childcare as possible. But that's going to be a kind of complex issue, and we're going to work through that with the Scottish Government and partners as we're going forward. Carrie, I don't know if you've got anything you would want to add on that.
Thanks, Eddie. My background's early years. I started off my career as a nursery nurse. So early years is something that's really very important to me, and we know the importance of the early years to get it right for our children and young people, because if they get that best start, then that makes a big difference going forward. So I don't think there's any local authority in Scotland that's not looking at trying to maximise the number of hours that they're able to offer. But there will be a number of restrictions because they won't have been able to build the buildings that they were looking for. They won't be able to necessarily have been able to bring in all the staff because they might not have been able to do interviews, etc., etc. So there are some practical barriers that will stop people being able to deliver 1140 hour at this point in time. But I would reassure people that all local authorities are looking at how they will then be able to deliver 1140 hours going forward. Certainly in my local authority, we had looked to try and deliver 1140 hours in almost all of our nurseries, apart from where we hadn't got our new builds completed. But because we're now having to look at smaller groupings, then that's had to change again. So the current circumstances, the pandemic that we find ourselves in, means that we may have to deliver something different at this point in time. But I think everybody is aware that early years is a really important stage for all of our children and young people, and we want to maximise the time that they can have in that environment to help them learn as they go forward for their futures.
Thanks for that. Sorry, Councillor McCabe, sorry, feel free.
I was just going to add, I co-chair the Early Learning Childcare Delivery Board with the Minister for Children and Young People, and we're meeting on Monday to sort of take stock of where we are and look at potentially planning for when we can roll out fully 1140 hours. But I know a number of councils are well advanced, and I had a report to one of our committees, our emergency committee, on Tuesday, which says that we are effectively in place to deliver 1140 hours by August. But in practical terms, we won't deliver 1140 hours because of the social distancing and other issues around the pandemic. So, but as soon as we're in some sense back to normality, we'll be able to put that in place. And I think most councils are pretty well advanced in terms of that. But we'll get a clearer national picture, I think, when we have a meeting of the delivery board.
Okay, that's really helpful. That's good news. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is that I know that many councils aren't delivering 1140 or planning to. In fact, some have told providers they're only going to deliver the 600, which is the statutory minimum. And that's really concerning to the providers who had already planned that funding. And it's really concerning to the parents that were relying on the places and those hours, because you've got a double whammy now. We've got parents who want to go back to work, but the childcare funding hours have reduced in their local council areas, and they've now got to teach their children part-time at home. You can see the issue here. I'm slightly concerned that nobody knows the answer to the question. That may be a question for the childcare minister. I'll be happy to pose that in Parliament next week. But surely we should have a bigger picture view on what's happening across the country. It sounds to me from the feedback I'm getting from nurseries and providers and parents that there is a real issue here, and they're very concerned.
We can certainly arrange, and Eddie, I'm sure will take note of this, we can certainly arrange to provide the committee with an update in terms of the picture across the country as we know it through the mechanisms that are available. I mean, absolutely, I think as we've discussed earlier in the meeting, childcare is an absolute huge issue, and there's not a desire on the part of councils not to provide the childcare that parents require, but councils are operating under enormously challenging circumstances, very different circumstances in many cases as well. And if you actually look at the plan for the 1140 expansion, much of the implementation of that was factored in between March and August. So it's not a surprise that quite a number of councils may not be in a position to deliver 1140 hours when most of the additional provision, recruiting staff, etc., was going to be put in place over that period. And obviously construction work has stopped, and recruiting staff is very difficult in the middle of a pandemic.
I think Miss Lindsay wanted to come in as well on that point. Thanks. Carrie?
Thanks, Claire. It's not been called Miss Lindsay for a long time. It takes me back to my teaching days. Thank you for that. Just a quick comment, really, just to say that obviously the guidance for early learning and childcare settings and the social distancing or the bubble groupings, that only came out on Monday. So I think it's, to expect that we have actually information about what all the 32 local authorities are doing, I don't think is very practical at this point in time. It's certainly something that I'm sure the early learning and childcare group will be looking at, as Councillor McCabe described. So people who might have thought they were doing 1140, that might change because of the guidance that was there on Monday. So I'm sure we can get that information once people have got their new models.
Mr. Green?
In the interest of time, all I'll say is that a number of providers have told me that they won't survive. Therefore, you will have an issue in delivering hours. It's going to be councils that are going to have to deliver childcare in a nursery environment if many private providers go under in the next few months. Are you planning for that?
Well, I mean, what I would say, and again, Carrie can come in on that, our objective throughout this pandemic is to ensure that
Good, thank you.
Okay, final question from Ms Wishart, please.
Thank you, convener, and I'm very conscious of time too, so I will try and keep this brief. I had actually been asked why nobody's discussing ELC and nursery provision in this debate, given it's an essential part for parents to get back to work. So I hope that view will have, and our discussions today will have changed that view. So does the panel have any comment on whether reduced ELC capacity and lack of childcare with reduced schooling hours will have a more detrimental effect on women? And whether that any equalities assessments or information, have you got anything like that you could share?
Maybe, I don't know, Eddie, come in at the policy level as to how we're looking at that, and then obviously Carrie.
No, I'll bring Carrie in as well, but no, absolutely. I think there's a total recognition that that there is likely to be a disproportionate impact on women here. And I think that's something that we'll want to pick up as we begin to look at the next stages to this. The first stage was obviously, we paused the 1140 hours, and in that sense, childcare at that point was focused on hubs and emergency childcare. But I think as we come back, and we start to ramp up provision, we need to take that very, very seriously and look at what that means. But Carrie, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I suppose just to say about the fact that ELC is not focused on, I don't know if you just meant in this conversation or in the kind of national debate. I think that's because the guidance only came out on Monday, so there won't be the plans out there in the same numbers as the plans will be out for primary and secondary. So sorry if I got that wrong, if it was just about this conversation you meant.
No, I meant in the wider context that parents are feeling that it had been left out.
Yeah, so that is because the guidance only came out on Monday, so that's why, and maybe we need to get better, as I say, at communicating some of that. But now that the guidance is there, then that information will be starting to go out to parents. And I absolutely agree with you about the impact on women, and it's something I feel really strongly about. And certainly we're happy to look at equality impact assessments for a whole range of different equality groupings going forward with what we're planning to do. The childcare element, we're waiting, as I say, to find out about the support, the funding, the reviewing of the key workers. I suppose that's the best place for us to think about in local authorities. How can we support some of that to make sure that our women are not as disadvantaged as it might appear?
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Can I thank everyone, especially Councillor McCabe, Ms Lindsay and Mr Follen for the attendance today. It's been a long committee and we really appreciated of your time. I'm just going to close the meeting and move into private session with the rest of the committee, but thank you everyone for their attendance this morning.